Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Hello, Wild Blue Podcast listeners. Todd Mitten here, along with Chris Kirk. How are you today, Chris?
Good, Todd. Fun to do this.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's winter time in Kansas City, and that got me to thinking a little bit about winter operations in general aviation airplanes, and maybe I can learn some stuff by talking to you, and we can get some ideas on and thoughts on the challenges and so on that winter operations bring to general aviation airplanes. You want to talk about that today?
Yeah, sure. And I think just as a matter of perspective, so that the listeners understand where we're coming from with this, I'm not trying to say any of this to impress anybody, but Todd and I have extensive background in military operations, in airline operations, and in general aviation operations. So we look at things probably a little bit different than somebody who is especially fairly new to general aviation. And I think the one thing on winter ops, Todd, that I would like to lead off with is I don't think a lot of folks give it enough
credence.
Yeah, they don't pay enough attention to it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think there's a lot of aspects to think about that we can touch on today. Everything from the basics of having your airplane ready to go, ideas for preheating it, so on, to taxiing, to flying, to weather aspects. There's a lot of thoughts or challenges, I would say, that are unique to winter time operations from the Midwest to the Northeast and Northern states. Mm-hmm. You know, some of our listeners may be in the South, but that doesn't mean they won't one day fly their airplane in winter time. Why? I don't know. No, they may fly their airplane into wintertime conditions up north. So yeah, that's why I think it might be a topic of interest that we could learn a few things from.
I think for some folks, and you and I see this a lot when we're talking to a prospective buyer, that just because they have the money to buy an airplane that has a certain capability, so in this case, maybe it's de-iced, maybe it's a known ice airplane.
True.
They think that it's okay, no problem. I can just press on with that. Well, you know, like you were saying, even if you are in the South, and let's say you're doing business in the Great Lakes region in the fall or wintertime, and man, you know, you talk about how quickly an airplane can ice up somewhere. I mean, it's bad enough here, but those areas are just absolutely incredible.
Well, that's a great point in the sense that it doesn't have to be January to have problems. You know, it may be early October or late September or well into the spring, April, and into the 1st of May.
Heck, I think I've seen ice on an airplane just about every month of the year. You probably have too.
Yeah, it's a fact. But so what do you think? We kind of start chronologically in the sense of a flight. Getting ready for a flight, what are some of the preheating thoughts that you have and aspects that we might consider?
Well, I think an engine heater is a good thing. You know, probably some guys do what I do, and that is I use a different grade of oil in the winter than I do in the summer. I use a multi-viscosity oil in the winter time, so it doesn't kind of glob all up.
Right.
But you know, I guess kind of putting a plug in for somebody. You know, I bought back in, I must have been November, a unit called the Switch-On. And because of COVID and things are way beyond their control, the unit hasn't been delivered yet, but we have a customer who has one right over here in his hangar. So I was over there playing around with his. And so it's a box. I just bought the 2-channel box, but you plug it in and you run a cord from it to whatever in your hangar or wherever. It doesn't even have to be airplane related, but I'm going to run a cord from it to my engine heater. And then it's just an app on the phone. So I can, instead of having that heater on constantly or making that 30-minute trek to the airport, I just hit my app and, or I can set the timer on it. So, I want my engine to start heating up 4 or 5 hours before I go out there. But
what temperature would you use as sort of a threshold, so to speak, for when to bother with it?
I'm thinking And I got nothing to back this up. I'm thinking in the 30s.
Yeah,
somewhere.
I would agree. I don't think above 40 and above, there's no need to preheat anything, and even in the mid 30s, maybe I think most manufacturers will recommend 20 degrees sticks in my head Fahrenheit, which is a little cold for most of us, honestly, to go out and start our engines. I think if you have a way to heat it, you would do it. If it were a 28 or 33 degree day, you probably would. But that I know it's recommended.
I think on my Tanis heater, I'd have to get in the book, but I think that there's a threshold on it where even if I plug it in, it's not going to turn on unless it is, unless it is at such and such a temperature.
Another thought on heating is a lot of guys do this. Take a small space heater and put it in the cockpit and warm them. So then you get not only a warm cockpit, but you get your radios. It's probably better for them, than extreme cold.
I know guys that do that remotely too. That scares the crap out of me, frankly. I think I would do it if I was, I knew I was going to be in the hangar for a little while ahead of time, but I just have visions of not only burning my airplane down, but the 10 that are in that hangar complex with me.
That's bad. I might feel a little bad about that if I were that responsible for that. Oh, man. And then, so what else? We pull the airplane out. Obviously, there's thoughts, and this is it. You might be able to pull your airplane out. Maybe you have, like I used to have a Cherokee 180, and I could pull that airplane out, of course, no problem, by hand without any assistance. But in wintertime, if there's ice and snow on the ground, it can be a challenge either to pull it out or push it in, depending on the slope of the.
Right.
Usually it's pushing it back in. There's a little bit of a downhill slope, but you're probably going to need help. Maybe a consideration if you're flying in the winter and you land and you can't put your airplane away without help. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then on top of that, you think about the snow and the ice on the ramp. And so now, I've been to places where it's been darn near impossible to even do a run-up.
Yeah.
Because you can't get enough footing, to hold the airplane steady.
That's true. And I thought you were going to go toward the snow also. Some airports, obviously one of the very, very, very major benefits to general aviation is the small airports and small cities that we can fly our airplanes to for business or pleasure purposes, but some of those places may not be plowed very well or plowed in a manner that could cause some real issues.
Yeah, I think some of those places, here we are at the Kansas City Downtown Airport, and obviously we got our own aviation department. As soon as it snows, those trucks are out there, and it's rarely an issue, even around the hangars.
Right.
I keep a shovel there, probably like you do at your hangar. So in case I gotta, you open the door and there's a ledge there or a bunch of snow that's piled up, I can get rid of it. But I think some of these little towns, I can only imagine that it's probably their roads department that's out there clearing it, and that's probably the last on their list.
Yes.
So you might lose some days of availability.
And there may not be. That brings up a good thought. There may not be a NOTAM out there that. So if you're coming from a southern climate and thinking about flying to a remote airport in Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, wherever, Iowa, you may want to try to get a hold of somebody about the condition of the airport before you leave your home base, because the reality of it is, if there's been a big snow, it may take a couple of days to get the airport cleared.
Yeah. Todd, I think, tell me if you agree or disagree, but I think one of the things that a lot of GA guys overlook, or maybe again don't pay enough attention to, is frost on their airplane. Because you get mornings where, you can remember, was it last year we were all trying to go somewhere, and we pulled the airplane out, and boom, as soon as it got out in that air, whoosh, the whole booger frosted up, and so we towed it over to get some sunlight on it. But I've seen a lot of folks taxi out and take off, and they're almost doing the peephole driving, people doing their cars, through the windscreen.
Yes.
And they've got frost on their, wings. And, from our backgrounds, that's a huge no-no.
That's exactly right. And it is a point that is well worth mentioning, because conditions can change from the change of pulling the airplane. The airplane was hangared, Now it's out in the air, and just like that, you've got an issue. So what do you do? You pretty much wait, or I mean, unless you got a way to get that frost off there, which I don't really know of a good way. You know, you can't really pour some water on it; it's going to freeze. So
Right. Yeah, I found personally that if I know that it's an active frost morning, and it's possible, and I know I'm going to be leaving or plan to leave, I'll get everything on the airplane done the night before, so that when I pull that booger out, I'm ready to crank it up. As soon as I can get airflow over the airplane, there's not going to be any frost on it.
No.
Now you might have issues with the wingtips and that kind of stuff, and that's still a concern. But if you can get air flowing, it's not going to, it's not going to frost.
So, and that brings up that point again. We alluded to it earlier with snowbanks, taxiing. You get in a hurry because you're worried about frost accumulating or things of that nature. And now you don't realize it or don't think about it because it's not ever there any other time. But the one time a year when it snowed 12 inches at your airport, now they got a pile of snow just off a taxiway somewhere. So,
and how many airplanes have we sold over the years that had a dinged wing or a nose gear collapse because they didn't account for the torque on takeoff roll, and it shot them right over into that snowbank?
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't even begin to think how many we've seen over the years that's happened.
No, that's crazy. You see, that's why it's a topic worth talking about. If this makes you think, and it even helps us to talk about this stuff, if it makes you think about that kind of a, how do I want to say it, just the safety aspects, but slowing down and doing things well, then I think it's worth having this discussion that we're having, because wintertime, almost always it's better to slow down. That's what they teach us at the airline, slow down. Obviously, taxi speeds are definitely a factor, as is even worst case what you just talked about, the ability to have that torque just pull you right off the side of the snow or ice covered runway, and boom, you're in the snowbank.
Yeah. Well, you can have you can even have situations where idle power, your airplane will be moving with your brakes on.
True.
One of the most eye-opening situations I ever had like that is, I'm taxiing an airliner into the gate in Detroit, and she ain't stopping, and wasn't going very fast, and so I was just that close from killing the engines, or put them in reverse and get them, because there was just, and killing was probably the better option, because reverse might have even made it even worse. But fortunately, just right before, I got the X from the marshaller, caught a little concrete and came to a stop, and then we killed it quick.
Well, it's funny you say that. It reminded me of a story. I was an Embraer 145 captain when I was furloughed, and so I did this at a program. You go be a captain on the regional jet. So I landed up in Ottawa, Canada, and taxied in. It was night. I mean, super, super slow. The only things that were open were the runways. I mean, I landed on one runway, had to turn around, taxi back, go to the crossing runway, taxi on it, and eventually into the ramp, because there were just limited ways to get in, because they'd had quite a bit of weather there. And I noticed taxiing in, there was an Air Canada Airbus sitting in kind of an odd spot on a taxiway out in a remote somewhat area, and I never gave it another thought. I just saw it. Taxied in all the way into the gate, going about half a mile an hour, all the way in. Pulled up to the gate, got stopped, like you're talking about, shut down happily. Ooh, that was good. And then the ground crew guy comes up after we deplaned all the passengers and said, "Well, you're the first airplane we didn't have to tow into the gate all day." Nobody told me.
Nobody said anything.
Nobody said
thanks for letting me know.
Oh, by the way, Air Canada had an airplane do a 360 or a 180 or something out there in the ramp. Oh, is that right? That was the airplane we'd seen. Literally.
Seriously.
And so, no word from dispatch. Welcome to the regional airlines. But anyway, no word from dispatch, and nothing that gave me a real heads up as to how challenging the conditions had been all day. But again, we slowed way, way, way down and did it and safely did it. But so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I get most concerned about with general aviation operators, not just with ice, but weather and weight and balance, is what's the term? Somebody told me the other day, maybe it was you. They get, it happens one time, and it works out for them, and so they get a little numb to it. They get a little brave. They get a little, well, I can do that again. And then they do it again. I mean, walked over here to the GA terminal last year, was it? This guy in this A36 comes taxiing in, and I mean, this thing is dripping with ice. Just, and he was, you could tell he was somewhat concerned, but man, to me, he did not show anywhere near the concern that he needed. It was not a de-iced airplane. That stuff adds tons of weight. You don't have the excess thrust. You don't have the excess lift. You don't have the capability in an airplane like that to handle that.
Well, and weight is maybe even not even their most major problem. Is what you don't know. You've become a test pilot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't know.
That's a good way to put it.
You don't know how that airflow over that wing is. You don't know what the stall speed is now. May as well be a test pilot. Good luck, Chuck.
Yep, that is a good way to put it.
So yes, if which brings us probably to another good point: avoiding icing conditions in flight. And then we can talk about de-iced and anti-iced airplanes. But as far as avoidance, I think that we all know getting a good PIREP or getting a good weather briefing is a start to that. But even so, it still happens that people run into icing inadvertently. So,
and especially at the lower altitudes. I mean, that's where general aviation is going to run into. That's where everybody runs into it.
Right.
You're running into it at the lower altitudes, and you're becoming numb to the idea that, oh, okay, I can do that. It's at the lower altitudes. What you're not realizing is the professionals that are flying higher, they want in and out of that stuff as quickly as they can.
Yes. And
they've got good de or anti-icing systems. I mean, very robust. They can handle it, but even they don't want to be in it.
No.
And so the last thing they're going to do is cruise in it for any longer than they absolutely have to. And so when you're a GA guy tooling around, you got to be aware of that, of your limited ability from your airplane.
Yeah, the moment you're in it, the moment you see it starting to accumulate, it's time to move, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The challenge can be in the airport environment, because now you're getting vectored around by approach, and they're limited by their, there's only a 2,000 or 3,000 foot maybe altitude availability that you can, and so you can get stuck in it for a period of time. That's usually how it's going to happen, in my opinion. One of the strongest possibilities of really being unable to get out of it. So I don't necessarily have any great advice there, other than just to tell approach, I can't do it. I got to move.
And I'm sure you, in your career, you've been around a long, long, long time, right? So you've seen a lot of ice accumulate on an airplane.
Oh yeah, I've seen it on the airliners accumulate. Used to be on the Douglas products, you'd watch it build up, as you well know, as a former Mad Dog pilot. Watching that ice accumulate on the windshield wiper.
Oh man. I had one time that accumulated the size of a softball.
Yeah, I believe it. I've seen that too. DC-9, flying to St. Louis. I can remember that very, very clearly. Amazing.
Yeah.
And we got all that, like you said, all that ability to shed the ice one way or another, prevent the ice, and we don't want to be there in spite of that.
Man. Yeah, no way. And and you're not, as a GA guy, you're also not. You don't have the luxury, or maybe it's resources or finances, for that matter, to go out and get de-iced, prior to departure.
Right.
So where the airlines have that ability, you're going through sometimes a two-step process to keep yourself safe once you do get airborne into that.
Frankly, you're just going to tell your passengers or whomever your work, if you're carrying passengers in as part of your, whether it's for pleasure or business, hey, we're going to have to wait. It's probably more thunderstorms in the summer and warmer months the reason, and obviously icing conditions in the winter.
Well, you and I were just talking about this a little bit ago, because I'm doing an angel flight on Sunday.
Right.
We've already moved it one day, and now I'm looking at the forecast, and 2 days away, Sunday showing 43% chance of rain. The high for the day is going to be 39 degrees, I think. The ceilings are going to be 1,000 feet. So, we get done here. One of my first things to do today is call the other pilots. Say, I think we need to, we're going to have to move this because I'm not going to go flying in that crap.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's just good decision making, and that's from years and years of experience and thinking about it.
Sometimes experience comes from bad decisions, doesn't it?
Yeah. Let's briefly touch on boots because that's the most common general aviation. Well, I suppose arguably pitot heat's the most common next to pitot heat. Yeah. But the most common general aviation de-icing, and believe me, I am not any bit of a person to be talking about boots for the best way to operate. I've read the stuff, but I would say that if you have that capability in your airplane and let's say you just recently bought a Mirage or something, and you live down south, you've never really flown it up north, you may want to get some instruction, in my opinion, on how to really use that so you're comfortable.
Yeah.
I don't think the first time to figure it out is when you're in moderate icing and can't get out of it.
Well, it's one of those situations where, and I'm going to disagree with you here a little bit, only because I think now, especially, since Cirrus started putting on TKS back, when it was 04-ish, somewhere in there, the, TKS is become a super popular product, but it still has its own training regimen, right?
True.
And, Piper's still using the boots on the M-class stuff, and a lot of others are too, but if you're counting on that to work the first time you go out there, but that's the first time you've turned it on, that's a bad move.
Right.
Right.
And with TKS, you gotta have it serviced. You gotta make sure
Yeah.
So there's some.
Yeah, those pores will become clogged.
Yeah.
The ice boots won't inflate. You have a bad vacuum pump. I mean, who knows?
Right. There's a lot of stuff to consider. Now, the last part of this that crosses my mind and may not be something that people think about in winter operations, but you can really, really, really get yourself hurt on the ramp by falling down.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, Chris, I walk with you, you fall down a lot.
Help, I fall and I can't get up.
I just have this terrible thought, to be really honest. I'm stepping off a wing and losing my footing and falling hard, hitting my head on the wing, I mean, it's just that is like a weird fear of mine. And so think about not only yourself, but your passengers, and the ramp can be a very dangerous spot.
Yeah, it can. Well, if you're around some place where they have been using de-icing fluid, my gosh, that stuff's slick. And,
it is.
I have fallen, or at least caught myself falling, especially, and it's just like on the highway. If you're on a painted area that's wet, that paint is going to be super slick, and people don't think about that.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think that we've covered a lot of the thoughts we have about winter operation. You got anything else you'd like to add, or
No, we could go on and on, but it's just been a good little fun discussion, and again, we're always game to hear from what you have to say, and throw it out on our Facebook page, and even though our primary business here is the buying and selling of essentially airplanes that you will be proud to own. It's fun for us to talk about some of these other topics with, the older we get, we don't like to look in the mirror and say, gosh, there's no way I can be that old. But with that age comes experience, and we just enjoy sharing that.
No, that's a fact. It is. We're passionate about aviation, and honestly, I tell guys all the time, as hokey as it sounds, that is a big part of the reason why I do this. I like airplanes. I like talking about aviation. So that's why we
good group of people that we work with, and it's fun. Yeah.
Yep. Well, good. Let's sign off for today, and until the next time, I invite you to check us out on Facebook or Instagram. Visit our website at flywildblue.com, and I want to thank you all very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.